Tonight, we journey into the mists of legend, to the story of a leader whose name has outlasted his empire. This is the complete story of Arthur, the man who was tasked with building a kingdom from the embers of a dead world. The man who became the once and future king. For 400 years, the island of Britain had lived under the protection of Rome. It was a land of laws, straight roads, heated villas, and great stone cities. Legions patrolled the massive wall in the north, keeping the savage tribes at bay. Order was maintained. But empires, like all things, must end. In the year 410 AD, the heart of the empire was failing, and Rome issued a final command. The legions were recalled, pulled back across the sea to defend their homeland. They left the shores of Britain, and they never returned. A great silence fell upon the land. And then, the silence was broken by the sound of screams and the clash of steel. The people of Britain had forgotten how to defend themselves. The Roman order that had held their world together vanished like a dream upon waking. The great roads, no longer patrolled, became the territory of bandits. The cities, no longer supplied, began to crumble. The island fractured. In the power vacuum, dozens of small, vicious rulers emerged. They were not kings in any sense we would recognize. They were warlords, men who ruled by the strength of their personal armies, fighting their neighbors for scraps of land, food, and fading Roman treasures. Loyalty was a luxury, and peace was a forgotten memory. This was the land that would become known as the Dark Ages. From the north, the painted tribes of the Picts, no longer held back by the Great Wall, swarmed down to raid and burn. From the west, across the Irish Sea, raiders known as the Scots landed their boats, hungry for slaves and plunder. But the greatest threat came from the east. Across the cold North Sea, new peoples were stirring. They were the Angles, the Jutes, and the Saxons. These were fierce, seafaring tribes from the lands we now call Germany and Denmark. At first, some British warlords were foolish enough to hire them as mercenaries, paying them to fight their rivals. But the mercenaries saw a land that was rich, fertile, and most importantly, weak. They stopped taking orders and started taking the land for themselves. They came in waves, boat after boat, family after family, driving their longships onto the beaches and pushing inland. They did not want to join the British world. They wanted to replace it. The native Britons, the people who were a mix of ancient Celtic tribes and Roman citizens, were pushed further and further west, into the mountains of Wales and the rocky coasts of Cornwall. They were a people living in terror, clinging to the memory of a golden age of peace that was now lost forever. They sent a desperate, final plea to the last Roman commanders, a letter that history remembers as the Groan of the Britons. It read, "The barbarians drive us to the sea drives us back to the barbarians. Between these two, we are either slaughtered or drowned." No help came. This was a world without a center. It was a world of broken oaths, of burning villages, and of petty tyrants. It was a world that desperately needed more than just another warlord. It needed a symbol. It needed a leader who could make enemies sit at the same table, who could remind them of a greater idea than just surviving another winter. The land was crying out for a king who could unite the warring tribes, a general who could finally push back the Saxon tide, and a man who could bring justice back to a lawless world. It is in this crucible of fire, chaos, and desperation that our story truly begins. The old world was dead, and the new one was waiting to be born. It was waiting for a prophecy. It was waiting for a mage named Merlin. And it was waiting for the arrival of a child who would one day be named Arthur. In this age of ruin, there was one man who saw the shattered pieces of Britain not just as an end, but as a beginning. His name was Merlin. We must not think of Merlin as a mere wizard from a children's story, a man who shoots fire from his hands. He was something far older and far more dangerous. He was a whisper in the ears of kings, a shadowy figure who walked the hidden paths of the world. He understood history. He understood that great leaders were not born by chance, but were forged by necessity. Merlin saw the Saxon invaders and the British warlords, and he knew that strength alone would not be enough to save the island. Force would only be met by equal force. What Britain needed was a new idea. It needed a king who could command loyalty not through fear, but through virtue. A king who could unite the land because he was seen as truly just. And to create such a king, Merlin had to start before the beginning. He needed to control the child's birth, his bloodline, and most importantly, his upbringing. He began to search for the vessel, the right parents to create this prophesied leader. His gaze fell upon the most powerful warlord in Britain, Uther Pendragon. Uther was the closest thing the broken land had to a high king. He was a brutal and effective warrior, a man who held his small empire together with an iron will. He commanded respect, but he also had a fatal flaw, a fire in his blood, a passion that, if left unchecked, would burn his entire world. Merlin became Uther's advisor, his prophetee, guiding his battles and his strategies, all the while waiting for the right moment to enact his own great plan. The moment came, as it so often does, not on a battlefield, but at a feast. To celebrate a great victory, Uther called all his allied lords to his fortress. Among them was his most loyal and powerful duke, a man named Gorlois of Cornwall. And with Gorlois came his wife, the Lady Igraine. Igraine was beautiful, but it was her dignity and her strength of character that set her apart. When Uther Pendragon laid eyes on her, his world was consumed. He was overcome by a desire so profound that it erased all thought of loyalty, honor, and duty. He spent the entire feast focused only on her, ignoring his other guests, blind to the growing scandal. Igraine was a virtuous woman and loyal to her husband. She saw the king's dangerous obsession and was frightened. Her husband, Gorlois, was no fool. He saw the way Uther looked at his wife, and he knew that no king's law would protect her. In the middle of the night, without asking the king's permission, an act of open defiance, Gorlois and Igraine fled the court and rode hard for their own lands in Cornwall. Uther was enraged. His obsession, now mixed with the fury of a slighted king, turned to war. He declared his most loyal duke, Gorlois, a traitor to the realm and marched his army south. But Gorlois was a smart commander. He hid Igraine in his most secure fortress, the castle of Tintagel, a fortress built on a high cliff, accessible only by a single narrow bridge over the sea. He himself prepared for a siege at another of his castles, Demiliac. Uther's army was stalled, unable to break the walls and unable to reach the woman he craved. The king grew mad with his desire. He was useless as a ruler, able to think of nothing else. Finally, in desperation, he called for Merlin. This was the moment Merlin had been waiting for. He listened to the king's raving, his pleas for magic to give him Igraine. And Merlin saw his path. He would use the king's greatest sin to create the kingdom's greatest savior. Merlin agreed, but his price was absolute. "I will give you the likeness of her husband," Merlin said, his voice quiet in the raging tent. "You will go to her at Tintagel, and she will believe you are Gorlois returned from the battle. This night, the child of prophecy will be conceived. But you must swear an oath, by your crown and your soul. The child that is born of this night does not belong to you. He belongs to me. You will give him to me the moment he draws breath." Uther, blinded by his lust, would have promised anything. He swore the oath. That night, Merlin worked his magic. But it was a subtle magic, a magic of glamour, of shadows, and of suggestion. While Uther rode to Tintagel cloaked in the form of Gorlois, Merlin ensured that the real Gorlois, hearing a rumor of an attack, would ride out from his own castle into a trap laid by Uther's men. As Uther was welcomed into Igraine's bed, believing him to be her husband, the true Gorlois was cut down and killed on a dark road. The plan was perfect. The child was conceived in deceit, born from the blood of a powerful king and a noble woman, yet created by a terrible act of betrayal. This child would carry Uther's royal blood, but he would never know Uther's corrupting power. Months later, after Uther had married the widowed Igraine to legitimize his actions, a son was born. On the night of the birth, as a storm raged outside, Merlin appeared. He did not come to the great hall, but to a small, hidden postern gate. He was cloaked and silent. Uther, remembering his oath, and perhaps fearing the man who had orchestrated the entire affair, had the newborn babe wrapped in gold cloth and handed him out into the darkness. Merlin took the child. He looked down at the infant who held the future of Britain in his tiny hands. He gave the boy a name that, for now, meant nothing. He called him Arthur. And then, before the court even knew the child was gone, Merlin vanished into the night, taking the infant far, far away from the world of kings, politics, and power he was born to rule. Merlin did not take the future king to a hidden palace or a magical tower. His plan was far wiser and far more grounded. He traveled with the infant to the lands of a knight named Sir Ector. Sir Ector was not a great lord. He was not a politician or a powerful warlord. He was a man of modest lands and immense honor. He was loyal, fair, and good-hearted, a man who valued truth and hard work. He already had a young son of his own, a boy named Kay. Merlin arrived at Sir Ector's castle, perhaps disguised as an old traveler, and presented the baby. He told a simple, believable story. This was the orphan of a good knight and a noble lady, both killed in the chaotic wars that plagued the land. He asked Sir Ector to raise the boy as his own, alongside Kay, to teach him the ways of a knight. Sir Ector, seeing an infant in need, agreed without hesitation. His wife took the child in, and they named him Arthur. His royal bloodline was now a secret hidden in plain sight, buried under the roof of a simple rural knight. This decision by Merlin was the single most important moment in the forging of Arthur's character. The boy who was born a prince would not be raised as one. He would never hear the whispers of flatterers telling him he was special. He would never learn that his blood made him better than other men. He would learn the opposite. His new brother Kay was several years older, and in every way, Kay was the center of his father's world. Kay was the true-born son and heir. He was the one destined to inherit the lands and the title. He was strong, ambitious, and often arrogant, as young men destined for knighthood tend to be. Arthur was simply the other one, the younger brother, the tag-along. Kay, in his youthful pride, gave Arthur a nickname, Wart. It was an ugly, common name, meant to remind Arthur of his lowly place. As the boys grew, their paths diverged. Kay was trained as the future knight, while Arthur was trained as his squire. This meant Arthur's life was one of service. He was the first to rise, long before the sun. He would go to the stables, not to ride a magnificent war horse, but to muck out the stalls and feed the animals. He would go to the armory, not to practice with the finest swords, but to polish Kay's armor, to mend the leather straps, and to scrub the rust and blood from his brother's mail. He learned to hunt, not for sport, but to bring back game for the castle kitchens. He learned to serve at the high table, standing silently behind his father and brother, filling their cups, ready to obey their commands. He learned to be overlooked. He learned what it felt like to be the least important person in the room. And this, Merlin's plan, worked perfectly. This life of service did not make Arthur bitter. It made him kind. It forged in him a powerful empathy that no prince, born to power, could ever possess. When he saw a servant being mistreated, he felt it personally. When he saw a farmer struggling, he understood the value of the food on his table. He learned obedience before he ever learned to command. He learned duty before he ever dreamed of glory. while Sir Ector was teaching Arthur the practical skills of a knight: how to ride, how to handle a sword and lance, and the importance of keeping one's word. Merlin was never far away. The great mage did not abandon his project. He would appear from time to time, often in the guise of a wandering, eccentric old man. While Sir Ector trained Arthur's body and his sense of duty, Merlin trained his mind and his soul. He gave the boy lessons that no one else could. He taught Arthur to see the world not just through the eyes of a warrior, but through the eyes of a hawk, a fish, or a badger. He taught him that true strength was not about dominating others, but about understanding them. He posed riddles that forced Arthur to think about justice, tyranny, and the responsibilities of power. Merlin was not training a soldier. He was educating a king. He was instilling in Arthur the radical idea that might does not make right, that might must serve right. So, as Arthur grew into a strong and capable young man, he was possessed of a rare combination of qualities. He had the physical toughness of a warrior, but he also had the gentle heart of a servant. He was quick-witted and learned, but he was utterly without ambition. His brother Kay was the opposite. Kay had just been knighted, and he was loud, proud, and desperate to prove his strength to the world. Arthur, in turn, felt nothing but simple, loyal devotion. His only dream in life was to be a good squire, to serve his brother well, and to perhaps one day be knighted himself. He had no idea of the blood in his veins. He had no knowledge of Uther Pendragon, or the pact made in the storm. He was simply Arthur, the Wart, a good young man in a world that was about to be turned upside down. As the years passed, the land grew darker. King Uther Pendragon, old and without a known heir, finally died. The kingdom, which he had barely held together, exploded. The warlords and petty kings he had suppressed rose up, and Britain was once again plunged into the bloody chaos that had defined its birth. The land was leaderless, and the promise of Merlin's prophecy seemed to have died with the old king. Britain was bleeding. With Uther Pendragon gone, the land had no high king. Warlords rose up, the pacts of loyalty were broken, and the Saxons pushed harder, burning towns that had once been safe. The common people starved and prayed for a miracle. Merlin knew the time had come. His young king was ready, though he did not know it himself. But Arthur was an unknown squire. He could not simply walk into the court and claim the throne. He would be killed. Merlin needed a symbol, an undeniable miracle that would bypass the arguments of ambitious men. He went to the Archbishop of Canterbury and advised him to call a great tournament in Londinium at Christmas time. A truce would be declared for all. Every duke, lord, and knight of Britain was summoned to the city, each eager to prove his strength and perhaps make a claim for the empty throne. Among the many who came was Sir Ector, his newly knighted son Sir Kay, and Kay's loyal squire Arthur. On Christmas morning, the nobles gathered for the holy service. When they emerged, they found something new in the churchyard. A massive block of white marble sat in the square. On top of it, a heavy steel anvil. And plunged deep through the anvil into the stone was a magnificent sword. Golden letters were etched into the stone for all to read. The word said, "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king born of all Britain." A murmur of awe, then a rush of ambition, swept the crowd. One by one, the strongest and most arrogant lords stepped up. They pulled and strained, their faces turning red with effort. The sword did not move. It was as if it were part of the stone itself. Frustrated and angry, they declared it a trick and left to begin the tournament. Sir Kay, preparing for his first joust, suddenly paled. He had left his sword at the inn. "Arthur," he hissed, "ride back and fetch it, or I will be shamed." For a knight to appear weaponless was the ultimate disgrace. Arthur, loyal as ever, felt his brother's panic as his own. He raced back, but the inn was locked, Everyone had gone to the games. He felt a cold dread. He could not fail his brother. Desperate, he rode back, and then he remembered. He had passed the churchyard. He had seen a sword just sitting there. He had no idea what it was. He hadn't read the words. In his simple, practical mind, it was just a sword, and his brother needed one. I will borrow it for Kay, he thought. I will be sure to return it after. He rode into the deserted churchyard. No one was guarding the stone. He dismounted, walked up, and placed his hands on the hilt. He gave a simple, firm pull. The sword slid free from the anvil and the stone with no more effort than pulling a blade from a scabbard. He was happy to have solved the problem and raced to find his brother. He handed Kay the weapon. Kay's eyes went wide. He recognized it. In a cold rush of ambition, he rode to his father, holding the sword high. "Father," he shouted, "look, I have the sword from the stone. I must be the king." But Sir Ector was a wise man. He looked at Kay's ambitious face and Arthur's honest, confused one. He calmly led them back to the churchyard. "Kay," he said firmly, "put the sword back." Kay tried, but he could not. "Now you, Arthur." Confused, Arthur slid it back into the stone. "Now, Kay, pull it out," Sir Ector commanded. Kay pulled with all his might. It was immovable. "Now you, Arthur." Arthur, still not understanding, placed his hands on the hilt and drew it out a second time. In that instant, Sir Ector fell to his knees. Sir Kay, his arrogance shattered, knelt beside him. "Father, why do you kneel to me?" Arthur cried, horrified. It was then that Sir Ector told him the truth. "I am not your father. You are of a higher blood. And now, I know you are my king." The news brought Arthur only sorrow. He wept, begging Sir Ector to remain his father. He did not want to be a king. But the secret was out. The other lords, hearing the rumor, returned from the tournament. They were furious. "A boy, a squire of no known blood to rule us." They refused to believe it. They demanded to try again. One by one, the most powerful men in the land tried, and one by one they failed. Then, before the eyes of all, Arthur, the boy no one knew, stepped forward and drew the sword. The common people, tired of the warlords, let out a great roar of approval. The miracle was undeniable. The age of Arthur had begun. The miracle of the stone and sword was not enough. While the common people cheered for the boy who had been chosen by heaven, the powerful lords and petty kings who had failed the test were filled with a dark and bitter rage. They saw their own power threatened. They would not bow to a beardless boy of no known lineage, miracle or not. A powerful alliance of lords from the north, led by ambitious men like King Lot of Orkney, refused to acknowledge Arthur. They called him an impostor, a product of Merlin's trickery. They raised their armies and declared war, intending to crush the young king before his reign could even begin. Arthur, the boy who had never wanted to rule, was now a king at war. His first task was not to pass laws or build castles, but to defend his crown on the battlefield. And it was here, in the crucible of his first war, that the world saw that Arthur was not just a symbol. He was a commander. The gentle, humble squire was gone, and in his place was a brilliant and terrible warrior. Merlin stood by his side, not as a wizard, but as a master strategist. He advised the young king, taught him the art of war, the lay of the land, and the minds of his enemies. But the courage, that was all Arthur's. In his first great test, the Battle of Bedegraine, the allied lords vastly outnumbered Arthur's small army of loyal followers. They expected to scatter his forces in a single charge. They were wrong. Arthur, guided by Merlin's strategy, moved his troops under the cover of night, set a brilliant ambush, and led the charge himself. He was not a king who directed the battle from a safe hill. He was the first man in the tip of the spear. He fought in the thickest, bloodiest parts of the melee, his new sword from the stone flashing in the sun. His men, seeing their young king risk everything beside them, were inspired with a superhuman strength. They fought not for a distant crown, but for the man who bled with them. The battle was a crushing victory for Arthur. The allied kings were defeated, their armies broken, and many were taken prisoner. Now came the true test of his leadership. By all the laws of the age, he had every right to execute the kings who had rebelled against him. It was expected. It was what Uther would have done. It was the only way to ensure they would never threaten him again. The captured lords were brought before him in chains, fully expecting to die. But Arthur did something that no warlord in Britain could have predicted. He ordered their chains removed. He returned their swords. And he offered them mercy. He did not speak to them as a conqueror. He spoke to them as a fellow Briton. He told them that their true enemy was not in this camp. The true enemy was the Saxon, who was burning their lands and slaughtering their people while they fought amongst themselves. He asked them to stop the cycle of internal war that was killing the island. He offered them a full pardon, their lands, and their titles, if they would only kneel and swear an oath, to join him, to become his brothers, and to fight with him to save their common home. This act of mercy was a greater weapon than any sword. It was a political move of pure genius. Some lords, too proud and hateful, refused and were exiled. But many were stunned. They had come to fight a tyrant and had instead found a true leader. They saw his strength in battle, but they were conquered by his nobility. One by one they bent the knee. His most bitter enemies became his most loyal allies. His army did not just defeat its rivals, it absorbed them. With each battle and each act of mercy, his legend grew. He was proving that he was king not just by a magical stone, but by his own merit. He was the finest warrior on the field, and the wisest man in the council tent. He waged war for 12 great battles, pushing the Saxon invaders back to the sea, securing the borders of Britain for a generation. He had done the impossible. He had taken a fractured, dying land, and through his will, his sword, and his revolutionary idea of mercy, he had forged it into a single united kingdom. He had won his crown with a miracle, but he had secured it with his leadership. Now that the wars were over, the young warlord had to become a true king. He had to build the dream that Merlin had envisioned. He needed a capital. He needed a symbol of his new, united Britain. He needed Camelot. Arthur had won the peace. But in many ways, this was the harder task. It is one thing to unite men in the heat of battle against a common foe. It is another to keep them united in times of peace. He had seen how other kings ruled. He had seen his own father, Uther. In a normal court, the king sat on a high throne at a high table. His greatest lords would sit closest to him, a mark of their power. The lesser lords sat further down. This simple act of seating created a world of poison. Men would plot, flatter, and even murder, just to gain a seat closer to the king's ear. It was a system built on ego, jealousy, and fear. Arthur, who had been raised as a servant, who had polished boots and served at his brother's table, hated this system. He had no interest in being placed above his men. He wanted to sit with them. He would not rule from Uther's dark and bloody old fortress. He would build a new city, a new capital that would be a symbol of this new age. He called it Camelot. It would be a place of light, of learning, and of justice. But the heart of Camelot would not be a throne. It would be a table. The legend tells that he received this table as a wedding gift from King Leodegrance, the father of his new queen, Guinevere. But its power came from the idea Arthur gave it. It was a great round table, large enough to seat over 100 knights. This design was a revolution. A round table has no head. It has no foot. There is no seat of honor, no place more important than another. When Arthur sat at this table with his knights, he was not their master. He was their equal, just one man among many. It was a physical statement that every knight present, from the great duke to the young landless champion, had an equal voice and equal worth. This was more than just furniture. It was a new system of government. Power no longer flowed just from the king. It flowed from the fellowship. And to sit at this table, a man had to be more than just strong. He had to be worthy. Arthur created a new code of honor, and every knight who took a seat had to swear a powerful oath. This was the birth of chivalry. The oath was simple, but it changed the world. They swore to never commit an act of cruelty or murder. They swore to always flee from treason. They swore to grant mercy to any foe who asked for it. They swore to always give help to ladies, damsels, and widows in distress. And above all, they swore to never fight in a quarrel that was not just, never for personal gain, and never for riches. They would fight only for justice and for the defense of the realm. This was a radical idea. Before this, knights were just soldiers, strong men with swords who took what they wanted. Arthur was telling them that their strength was not a privilege. It was a responsibility. It was a tool given to them by God, and they must use it only to protect the weak and uphold the good. This idea was like a great light turned on in a dark world. From every corner of Britain, and even from lands across the sea, the greatest and most noble knights heard of what Arthur was building. They were not drawn by the promise of gold or land. They were drawn by the idea. The mighty Sir Gawain, Arthur's nephew, came, a man of perfect courage and loyalty. Sir Lancelot, a prince from a foreign land, the most skilled warrior in the world. Sir Percival, pure of heart. Sir Galahad, his son. One by one, the heroes of the age were drawn to Camelot to take a seat at the great round table. Their names, it was said, would magically appear on their chosen seats when they were deemed worthy. But one seat always remained empty. It was called the Siege Perilous, the perilous seat. Merlin himself had enchanted it, declaring that it was reserved for only one man, the purest and most perfect knight in all the world, the knight who was destined to achieve the quest for the Holy Grail. Any other man who dared to sit in it, any man with a trace of sin or arrogance in his heart, would be struck down and consumed by fire. This empty chair was a constant, silent reminder to every knight at the table, even the king, of the perfection they were all striving for. This was the golden age of Camelot. Arthur's knights, the fellowship of the Round Table, rode out across the land, not to conquer but to heal. They were the king's justice. They fought monsters, deposed tyrants, rescued prisoners, and brought the king's law to the wild corners of the land. Arthur had created his dream. He had built a kingdom founded not on fear, but on honor, equality, and justice. And for a brief shining moment in history, the world had a center of light. Many believe the sword Arthur pulled from the stone was the famed Excalibur. This is not so. The sword in the stone was a symbol, a test of character. Its purpose was political, not magical. It proved Arthur's right to rule. But in the chaos of his early wars, that first sword was broken. It happened in a fierce battle with a rival king named Pellinore. Arthur, perhaps still young and proud, fought his opponent with more fury than wisdom. He struck Pellinore's shield so hard that his own blade shattered into pieces, leaving him defenseless. He was humbled, and he was left without a weapon. He was despondent, feeling he had failed. But Merlin was not concerned. "The sword has served its purpose," the magician told him. "It made you a king. But now you must be the king, and for that you need a king's weapon. Come with me." Merlin led Arthur away from the battlefields and castles, deep into the wild heart of the land. He took him to the shores of a vast, unnaturally still lake. The water was dark as glass, and a thick white mist hung over its surface, silencing all sound. It was a place that did not feel like it belonged to the world of men. As Arthur stood on the shore, he saw a sight that defied belief. In the very center of the lake, an arm rose from the water. It was clothed in a sleeve of pure white silk, and the hand held aloft the most beautiful sword Arthur had ever seen. The hilt was encrusted with jewels, and the blade itself seemed to hum with a quiet power. "Behold," Merlin whispered, "the Lady of the Lake. That is your sword." A small boat, guided by the lady herself, appeared from the mist. She bid Arthur to come, and he was rowed out to the center of the lake. He took the magnificent sword and its scabbard from the unmoving hand. As he held it, he felt a power run up his arm, a connection to the ancient magic of Britain itself. The arm then slipped back beneath the water and was gone. The sword was named Excalibur, and it was a blade beyond compare. It was forged in the mystical Isle of Avalon, a place where the borders between worlds are thin. Its edge was so sharp it could cut through steel as easily as wood. Its light, when drawn in battle, could blind the king's enemies. It was the perfect weapon, and Arthur was filled with the pride of a warrior who holds an unmatched blade. He returned to the shore, holding Excalibur high. But Merlin was looking not at the sword, but at the empty scabbard, the sheath that Arthur had fastened to his belt. "My king," Merlin said, "which do you value more, the sword or the scabbard?" Arthur, still a young warrior, laughed. "The sword, of course, Merlin. What a strange question. The scabbard is just a holder. The sword is the weapon. This blade is priceless." Merlin shook his head slowly. His ancient eyes filled with wisdom. "You are wrong," he said. "You have chosen poorly, for the scabbard is 10 times more valuable than the sword." Arthur did not understand. "How can that be?" "The sword Excalibur will win you many battles," Merlin explained. "It will cut down your enemies and defend your life. But the scabbard is enchanted. So long as you wear it at your side, you shall lose no blood, no matter how gravely you are wounded. Your life will be protected." In that moment, Arthur understood the true lesson. Excalibur was the tool of a warrior. The scabbard was the tool of a king. Merlin was teaching him a final, vital piece of wisdom about leadership. A leader's life is not his own. It belongs to his people. His job is not to seek a glorious death in battle, but to endure for the sake of his kingdom. The sword was for his enemies, but the scabbard was for his people. It was a symbol that the king's preservation was the preservation of the realm itself. Arthur, now armed not just with power but with wisdom, returned to Camelot. He was no longer just the boy chosen by the stone. He was the king protected by the magic of the land, and he carried the responsibility for its survival with him, buckled at his waist. Arthur's dream of Camelot was now reality. The Round Table was built, the code was established, and the king ruled with a wisdom and mercy that the land had never known. This new light, this age of honor, acted as a beacon. From all corners of the world, brave men heard the stories of the High King of Britain and his noble fellowship. They were drawn to Camelot, not by the promise of gold, but by the promise of purpose. They came to test themselves, to pledge their swords to a king who was worthy of their loyalty. The seats at the table began to fill. Sir Gawain, Arthur's nephew, loyal and as strong as the sun. The wise Sir Bedivere, the steadfast Sir Kay, the pure Sir Percival. But of all the knights who came to Camelot, one name would soon shine brighter than all others, a name that would be spoken in the same breath as the king himself. His name was Lancelot. He was a prince from across the sea, from the kingdom of Gaul. But his past was shrouded in the same kind of magic that surrounded Arthur. He was known as Lancelot du Lac, Lancelot of the Lake. His story was that when he was just an infant, his father, King Ban, was defeated by a rival, and his kingdom was burned. As his parents fled, the child Lancelot was stolen away by a magical figure, the very same Lady of the Lake who had given Arthur his sword. She had seen the child's destiny and rescued him, taking him to her own hidden realm, a kingdom of glass and crystal beneath the water's surface. He was raised there in a world of magic, taught the arts of war, of courtesy, and of honor, not by men, but by the ancient Fae of Britain. When he finally emerged as a young man and came to Camelot, he was something more than human. He was the perfect warrior. In all the world, there was no one who could stand against him. In the joust, his lance was unerring. On the tournament field, he could defeat 10 knights at once. In the chaos of a real battle, he was a whirlwind of steel, seemingly invincible. His skill was so profound, it appeared almost supernatural. But his strength in battle was only half of his greatness. He was the living, breathing embodiment of Arthur's new code. He was the most humble of knights, never boasting of his own victories. He was the most generous, giving all his winnings to the poor and to other less fortunate knights. He was the most courteous in the hall, treating every person from the highest lady to the lowest stable hand with a gentle respect. And he was the most merciful, always the first to spare a fallen enemy and offer him grace. He was, in every way, perfect. He was the proof that Arthur's dream was not just a fantasy. The ideal knight could exist. Lancelot was that knight. King Arthur saw this at once. He did not feel jealousy for this perfect warrior. He felt a deep and profound love. He had found his champion. He had found his best friend. A bond formed between Arthur and Lancelot that became the central pillar of the entire court. They were brothers in every way but blood. Arthur trusted Lancelot above all other men, giving him command of his armies and a place at his right hand. Lancelot, in turn, worshipped Arthur. He saw in his king the one man in the world he would gladly die for. If Arthur was the son of Camelot, Lancelot was its brightest star, the champion who carried the king's light into the darkest corners of the realm. His loyalty was absolute. His honor was flawless. His friendship with the king was the bedrock upon which the peace of the kingdom rested. He was the best of them. A man raised by magic, defined by his honor, and loved by his king. He was the hero of the story, the pinnacle of the Round Table, the knight without flaw. But even the brightest star can cast a shadow, and a man who has never known failure is untested in the face of true temptation. Camelot was complete. The land was at peace. The king had his sword, his code, and his fellowship. But a kingdom, like a home, needs a heart. Arthur, now a king in full, knew it was time to take a wife. His choice fell on the Lady Guinevere, the daughter of a king whom Arthur had long respected. When she was brought to Camelot, the entire court was breathless. She was said to be the most beautiful woman in all of Britain, but like Arthur, her true strength was her character. She was intelligent, proud, and possessed a grace that made her every inch a queen. She was not just a wife for Arthur. She was a partner. If Arthur was the mind of Camelot, Guinevere became its soul. She presided over the great feasts and tournaments. Her smile the prize every champion sought. She was the one who encouraged poetry, music, and art in the halls of the castle, turning the stone fortress into a true center of civilization. She was the ideal lady, for whom the entire code of chivalry had been written. Arthur loved her completely, and she, in turn, respected and admired the noble king she had married. The kingdom was perfect. As the king's greatest champion, Sir Lancelot was given the highest honor a knight could receive. He was named the queen's personal champion. His sworn duty was to be her protector, her escort, her first sword in any time of need. This was a formal, public, and honorable position. And at first, their relationship was the perfect example of courtly love. He worshipped her from afar, as the ideal of beauty and virtue. He wore her token on his helmet during tournaments, dedicating his victories not to his own glory, but to her honor. And she, in turn, admired him as the perfect knight, the strong arm of her husband, the living symbol of Camelot's might. They were the three most important people in the kingdom: the king, the queen, and the champion. And they all loved each other. But the human heart is a complex and dangerous thing. Lancelot and Guinevere, thrown together constantly in the duties of the court, began to see more than just the ideals in each other. Their long conversations, their shared glances across the feast hall, their mutual admiration, it all began to weave a bond that was deeper and more personal than duty. The polite, distant worship of courtly love slowly, tragically, began to change. It warmed into a true and passionate affection. They found in each other a connection that neither had with anyone else. This was the beginning of the tragedy. They both loved Arthur. Lancelot would have died for his king, his best friend. Guinevere respected her husband and was a loyal queen. But they could not stop the love they felt for one another. It became the great, terrible secret of Camelot. Lancelot was a man torn in two. His entire life was built on his oath of loyalty to Arthur. Yet, his heart was pulling him toward the one person on earth he was forbidden to love. Every day was a torment. He would throw himself into dangerous quests, riding away from Camelot for months at a time, just to escape the temptation. But he would always be drawn back. Guinevere, too, was trapped. She was a good queen, but she was also a woman in a political marriage who had found a love that consumed her. They fought it. They denied it. But the love was real. And in a court full of watchful eyes, a secret so powerful cannot be kept forever. While Camelot celebrated its golden age, two shadows watched from the corners of the court. They saw the longing looks. They sensed the hidden tension. The first was Morgana Le Fay. She was Arthur's half-sister, the daughter of Igraine and her first husband, Gorlois. She had been a child when Uther Pendragon, Arthur's father, had killed her own. She saw Arthur as a usurper, the child of her family's destruction. She had studied dark magic and hated everything Arthur had built, seeing it as a lie built on a crime. The second shadow was her son, a young knight named Sir Mordred. He was a skilled and cunning warrior who had recently earned a seat at the Round Table. But he carried Morgana's poison in his heart. And he carried a deeper, darker secret. He was not only Morgana's son. He was Arthur's. Conceived years ago through a dark trick of magic and deceit. Morgana and Mordred saw this forbidden love between Lancelot and Guinevere. They saw it not as a tragedy, but as a weapon. It was the crack in the perfect wall of Camelot. It was the flaw in the perfect knight, the secret of the perfect queen. And they knew that if they could press on that crack, the entire kingdom, the king, the fellowship, and the dream of the Round Table would shatter. The love between Lancelot and Guinevere was a poison that had seeped into the foundations of Camelot. And like all poisons, it began to attract snakes. Sir Mordred, the secret son of Arthur, and his ally, Sir Agravaine, who was Arthur's own nephew, watched the king's champion and the queen. They did not see a tragedy. They saw an opportunity. They both hated Lancelot. Mordred because he was the queen's champion, and Agravaine out of simple, bitter jealousy of Lancelot's fame. They saw that by destroying Lancelot, they could also destroy the queen, and in doing so, break the king's heart and seize power for themselves. One evening, they gathered a small faction of knights and went to Arthur, publicly accusing the queen and Lancelot of treason. Arthur did not want to believe it. This was his wife, and this was his dearest friend. He was a man who ruled by trust. He angrily dismissed their claims, forbidding them to speak such slander. But Mordred was cunning. He said, "My king, you are blinded by your love. We are loyal to you and to the law. If you will not see the truth, we will bring you the proof you cannot deny." They proposed a trap. "Announce that you will be riding out for a great hunt," Mordred said. "Say that you will be gone all night. We know Lancelot will use that time to go to the Queen's chambers. We will be waiting. And you will have your proof." Arthur was torn. His heart was heavy with a dreadful suspicion. Perhaps he knew, deep down, that the rumors were true. But as king, he was bound by the law. He could not ignore a direct accusation of treason from his own knights. He reluctantly agreed. "Go," he said, his voice heavy. "Do as you must. But I pray you are wrong." The trap was set. Arthur announced his royal hunt and rode out from Camelot. That night Lancelot, hearing the king was gone, went as Mordred had predicted. He went to the Queen's private chambers. He was not in armor. He was dressed as a courtier, carrying only his personal sword, suspecting nothing. He was not with the Queen for long before the night was shattered by the sound of hammering on the door and a voice crying out. It was Mordred. "Traitor! Sir Lancelot, you are trapped. Come out and face the king's justice." Lancelot and Guinevere were frozen in terror. They were caught. Lancelot, with no armor and no shield, was surrounded. Outside the door, Mordred and Agravain had brought 12 knights of the Round Table, all in full armor, their swords drawn. "I have no armor," Lancelot whispered to the Queen. "I must surrender." "No," she wept. "They will kill you and they will burn me." Lancelot, his heart broken by his own shame, knew she was right. He was the greatest knight in the world, and he would not die in a trap. He went to the heavy door. He pulled it open just enough to see his accusers. The first knight to rush in was Sir Agravain. Lancelot, with his bare hands, grabbed the knight, pulled him into the dark room, and slammed the door. In seconds, he had disarmed and killed Agravain, and began to strap on the dead man's armor. The knights outside, hearing the fight, began to batter the door with a bench. Lancelot, now armed and partially armored, threw the door open and met them in the narrow hallway. What happened next was not a battle. It was a massacre. Lancelot was a lion cornered. He was filled with a desperate, terrible rage. Rage at Mordred, rage at his own failure, rage at the fate that had trapped him. He fought as he had never fought before. The knights of the Round Table, who were his friends, his brothers in arms, fell before him one by one. He cut them down in the torchlit hallway. It was a terrible, bloody end to the fellowship. When the fighting stopped, all 12 of the accusing knights were dead. Sir Mordred, badly wounded, was the only one to escape, crawling away into the darkness to nurse his wound and his hatred. Lancelot, his sword dripping with the blood of his friends, fled Camelot. He was a broken man. The dream was over. When Arthur returned from his hunt, he found the bodies of 13 of his own knights piled outside his wife's door. The proof was undeniable, written in blood. The sin was revealed. The fellowship was shattered. Lancelot was a fugitive, and Guinevere was a prisoner, her treason proven. King Arthur, his heart destroyed by the loss of his friend and the betrayal of his wife, was now trapped by his own law. He was not a husband anymore. He was a king, and the law demanded only one sentence for a queen's treason: death by fire. King Arthur was a broken man, but he was still the king. His own law, the foundation of Camelot, demanded that Queen Guinevere be put to death for her treason. A great pyre of wood was built in the square before the cathedral. The day of the execution was the darkest day the kingdom had ever known. The dream of Camelot was dead. Arthur sat, his face a mask of stone, forced by his own honor to watch his wife die. But two knights of the Round Table, Sir Gareth and Sir Gaheris, refused to take part. They were the beloved younger brothers of Sir Gawain, and they loved Sir Lancelot, who had been their mentor. They went to the king and told him they would not bear arms at this execution. Arthur, in his grief, ordered them to attend anyway, to stand guard as part of the queen's escort. They obeyed, but as a sign of protest, they went in plain clothes, with no armor and no weapons. The torch was lit. The queen was led to the pyre. And then, like a thunderbolt, he came. Sir Lancelot and the knights who remained loyal to him had been hiding in the woods. They would not let the queen die. They burst into the square in a full cavalry charge. It was chaos. Knights of the Round Table, who had been brothers for a lifetime, now found themselves on opposite sides of a bloody skirmish. Lancelot was not a man. He was a storm. His only thought was to reach the queen. He was in a state of battle madness, cutting down any man who stood between him and the pyre. He did not see faces. He only saw enemies. In his terrible blind rage, he cut down two unarmed men standing near the queen. He did not even look at them. He grabbed Guinevere, pulled her onto his horse, and fought his way back out of the square, vanishing before the king's forces could regroup. He had saved the queen, but he had sealed the kingdom's doom. When the dust settled, the bodies of the dead were laid out. Sir Gawain, who had not been present, arrived to find the bodies of his two younger brothers, Gareth and Gaheris, the boys he had raised, lying dead in the square. They had been killed by Lancelot, the man Gawain had loved and respected most in all the world. Gawain's heart did not just break, it turned to iron. His famous loyalty and his good nature were burned away, replaced by a grief so profound it became a white-hot, singular need for revenge. He went before King Arthur, no longer a loyal knight, but a man consumed. It was no longer about the queen. It was no longer about the law. It was about blood. He demanded war. Arthur, his heart already broken, now faced the fury of his most powerful nephew. He hesitated. He wanted to forgive his friend, but Gawain would not allow it. He accused the king of weakness. He used the power of his entire family, the great Orkney clan, to force the king's hand. The court was split. The fellowship of the Round Table was shattered forever. A bitter civil war began. Lancelot, with Guinevere, fled across the sea to his own mighty fortress in France. And King Arthur, his hand forced by Gawain's rage, gathered the entire army of Britain. He gathered his banners, his ships, and all the knights who remained loyal to him. He crossed the sea to lay siege to Lancelot's castle. It was the ultimate tragedy. The greatest king in the world, and his greatest knight, the two men who had built the dream of Camelot, were now locked in a bitter war, destroying each other while the kingdom they had built was left undefended. Arthur, besieging the castle of his best friend, had to leave someone in charge of Britain. He made a fatal choice. He left his son, Sir Mordred, the very man who had sprung the trap. He named him Lord Protector of the realm. Mordred, who had been waiting his entire life for this moment, watched his father's ship sail away. He now held the king's seal and the keys to the kingdom. As soon as Arthur was gone, Mordred began to forge letters, spreading lies that the king had been killed in the war in France. He used his power and his lies to rally the old enemies of Arthur. He declared himself the new High King of Britain. And to seal his treason, to steal everything his father had ever built, he announced his final, most monstrous act. He would take Queen Guinevere as his own wife and rule from the throne at Camelot. The news of Mordred's treason struck Arthur's camp in France like a judgment from God. The siege of Lancelot was over in an instant. The personal, painful war between friends was dwarfed by this monstrous betrayal at home. Arthur gathered his army, his heart now a cold stone, and sailed back to Britain. Mordred's forces were waiting for them on the beaches at Dover. A brutal battle erupted as the king's men tried to land. In that fight, Sir Gawain, still fighting with the fury of his grief, was struck a mortal blow to the head. He was carried to King Arthur, his great strength finally failing. As he lay dying, the fever of his rage finally broke. He saw, with terrible clarity, what his pride and his thirst for vengeance had done. He had forced his king into a war that left the kingdom undefended. "My king, my blindness, has destroyed us all," he whispered. With his last breath, he dictated a letter to be sent to Lancelot. It was not a letter of hate, but of forgiveness. He told Lancelot what had happened, and begged him, as his brother, to come to Britain and help his king in the final battle. And then, the greatest of Arthur's nephews, Sir Gawain, died. Arthur wept over him, now truly alone. He had lost his wife. He had lost his best friend. And now he had lost his family. He marched his grieving army inland, to a field in Cornwall called Camlan, where Mordred and his vast army of traitors were waiting. The night before the battle, Arthur fell into a troubled sleep. He had a dream. The ghost of Sir Gawain appeared to him, warning him. "Do not fight tomorrow," the spirit said. "If you fight, you will die and all your people with you. You must make a truce for 1 month. In 1 month, Lancelot will come with his army to save you." Arthur awoke in a cold sweat. For the first time in his life, he chose to listen to a warning. He sent a message to Mordred, calling for a truce. To his surprise, Mordred agreed. The two leaders were to meet in the center of the field, between their two armies, each bringing 14 knights. A treaty was drawn up, but the air was thick with mistrust. Before they met, both Arthur and Mordred gave the same fatal command to their armies. "If you see a single sword drawn, attack." The two kings met in the field. They talked. The truce was agreed upon. It seemed the war would be averted. And then fate intervened. A small venomous snake, an adder, slithered out of the grass and bit the ankle of one of Mordred's knights. The knight, in a moment of pure, unthinking instinct, cried out and drew his sword to kill the creature. That was all it took. A single flash of polished steel in the sunlight. Both armies saw it. Both armies roared the same word: treason. The horns blew. The banners were raised. And with a sound like thunder, the two last armies of Britain charged at each other. The Battle of Camlan was not a battle. It was the end of the world. It was a harvest of death. Knights who had sat at the same table, who had been brothers, now slaughtered each other in a desperate, hateful melee. They fought all day, until the field was ankle-deep in mud and blood. By sunset, a terrible silence fell. The entire fellowship of the Round Table was dead. The armies were gone. Hundreds of thousands of men lay slain. King Arthur, gravely wounded, pulled himself up on his spear. He looked across the field of corpses, lit by the setting sun. He saw only 2 men left standing, himself and his son, the traitor Mordred. "My lord, you are wounded." "Let him be," said the last surviving knight, Sir Bedivere. "Bedivere," Arthur said, his voice a low growl, "that man is the cause of all this misery. He will not leave this field alive." Arthur raised his spear, and with the last of his strength, he charged. Mordred, seeing his father come, raised his own sword and ran to meet him. Arthur struck with all his might, driving his spear clean through Mordred's body. It was a mortal blow, but Mordred, in a final terrible act of hatred, used his last ounce of life. He pulled himself up the spear's shaft until he was within reach of the king, and struck Arthur a single devastating blow to the head. Mordred, the traitor, fell dead. King Arthur collapsed, his own life's blood now pouring from a wound no scabbard could heal. He was dying. He turned to the weeping Sir Bedivere, his last knight. He held out his sword. "Take Excalibur," he commanded. "Go to the water's edge. Throw it back into the lake." Bedivere took the sword, but he could not do it. He hid the beautiful blade in the reeds and returned. "What did you see?" Arthur whispered. "My lord, I saw only the wind on the water." "You have lied," Arthur breathed. "Go again." A second time Bedivere went. A second time he failed. A second time he lied. "Traitor!" Arthur cried, his life fading. "You have betrayed me for a jeweled sword. Go now for the third time and do as I command, or I will kill you with my bare hands." Shamed, Bedivere ran to the lake. He closed his eyes and threw Excalibur with all his strength. And a miracle happened. Before the sword struck the water, an arm, clothed in white silk, rose from the lake, caught the sword by the hilt, brandished it 3 times, and then drew it down into the depths. Bedivere ran back and told the king what he had seen. "It is done," Arthur whispered. "Now, carry me to the shore." As Bedivere carried his king, a black barge, draped in shadow, drifted out of the mist. On its deck stood 3 queens, robed in black. They wept as they took their king from Bedivere and laid his head in their lap. "My lord," Bedivere cried, "what will become of me?" "I go now," Arthur said, his voice a faint breath, "to the Isle of Avalon, to heal me of my grievous wound." The barge turned and drifted slowly back into the mist, vanishing from the world of men. The king was gone. His body was never found. But the dream of Camelot, of justice, and of the Round Table remained. And a promise remained, whispered in the embers of the fire, that one day when his land needs him most, Arthur, the once and future king, will return.